York 89.9 on your FM dial at 734.
Okay, what was interesting about that is that actually he was still playing in an old mode. I mean, the uh, the actual. I mean, practically all of his bass drum beats were on the beat, on
On one
four,
or
on
on one.
one. But he was doing a lot of he was doing a lot of the things that would be done with the bass drum later on the snare drum. He was playing a lot of offbeat stuff, on the snare. That wasn't so squared off. I mean, he got into a lot of backbeat things and all. And above all, though, he was playing on a top cymbal. I
All the
mean,
time, except
oh,
for the
yeah, except
pianos.
for the piano solo, and that was that nice. It was a nice ride cymbal beat too, which he was famous for anyway. It just had a nice bounce to it, and so that to me, what he was doing in '41 at this moment was the cymbal beat was new, had a good feeling. It was a more modern feel, and what he was doing with his left hand when he wasn't playing backbeats was some new things. A new way, a more pushy way of doing it. The bass drum was pretty much except that he dropped a lot of bombs on one and four.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they were for 1941. That was a lot of bombing, as you would call it.
There
So
were-
I think that really was the beginning of what was to come.
we have things to come up next on the tape machine here, or on the record player. Uh, Now, what's the difference between what he's doing with the behind the trumpet solos, what he's doing with the snare drum, and like those things we heard, what you call the patented Joe Jones stuff? When he was playing the hi hat, the trumpet player would play, and he'd go whap whap, is it the same concept, or is it
Yeah,
just
really, I
made
mean,
into more of a thing here?
yeah, we made a little more out of it. That's all. But basically, you could, when you listen to if you look at it from chronologically or historically, Joe Jones and Catlett. Well, Joe Jones more. They were doing things that would be considered evolutionary, or revolutionary, or whatever. Uh, but I don't think they knew they were doing it.
Right.
You know.
It it was just something that kind of happens sometimes,
Yeah.
as opposed to someone like Kenny making it, saying this is a main part of what I'm doing. Is that what you mean?
Kenny was one of those guys
Yeah.
that was a little more musician, and was trying to create something, whereas Joe, I think whatever happened happened,
Right.
and Joe had been through that era already for himself,
Right.
and he was just always adding on. In other words,
Yeah.
like and now everybody else would dig that, of course, and it would enter your repertoire, and of tricks and things because you heard Joe Jones do it, and some of those things like most had to fall on Kenny, or somebody like that, but now you decide. Now all of a sudden your creative genes start working.
Yeah. To remember also that there were only just a few years between Joe and Kenny Clarke. I
That's
mean,
all.
a few years,
Yeah.
3 years,
Yeah,
something,
that's
something
all.
like that. So they were really the same generation. One.
It was the bands they played with too. Don't forget. It depends where you are.
Well, that's what one other question I'd like to ask you in terms of, you mentioned 1941 being a good year for bombing with the bass drum. Um, they make a big deal in jazz history books and jazz drums books about Kenny Clarke was the first one to drop bombs on the bass drum. Now, of course, that's not true because
it's
there
not
are
true.
records of
That's right.
Krupa doing it with Benny's band, and of course Joe Jones being very independent on some of the bassy records. You can hear
Sure.
him down there somewhere
yeah,
doing these
no,
offbeat
yeah.
things. So, is it just a matter of emphasis when they say that? I mean, that it meant more to Kluge's style. I mean, is that statement true? And if not,
What, the Kluge
why?
was the first
He was
one?
yeah, because that's
No, I
repeated
don't
in
believe- I
jazz history book after jazz history book. He was the first one to drop bombs on the bass
Well,
drum.
first of all, I think half of these guys who wrote those books weren't even around in the first place. They
Mhm.
and a lot of them never were uptown. Anyway,
Yep.
they just never got up there. So, you know, nobody ever heard. A lot of these people who write, they weren't there, you know. They weren't, you know, these drummers, these great drummers who played every night somewhere. You know, you don't know what was going on who knows what Joe Jones did in the course of a week on the road.
In Minneapolis in 1938.
Yeah, I mean, he might have hit on some things that, God, he never did again, and they never heard in New York. You know, these guys are judging everything by what they heard on records mostly, you know.
Yeah.
And on records, everybody played it safe most of the time because they had to.
That's why on this show I'm trying to, as many times as I can, to find live things.
The live
I'm
things
searching for live
Believe
things.
me, that's the greatest stuff because that's where everybody really plays their best, was in live situations. That's why we don't, you know, there are people, there are nights that, you know, that we don't know about and never will, you know. And because I remember, you know, in the different road bands I played, and I played with, you know, when I played with dance bands like Ray Anthony and Alvino Ray, playing what I used to call dumb music. But man, we did have our nights. We had nights when we sounded and felt like good jazz orchestras because we just happened to hit it.
Yeah.
And the leader was in a good enough mood, or was that kind of an audience where he called the jazz arrangements, you know, because every band, every dance band had some bebop charts in their book, you know.
Yeah.
We didn't play them hardly at all, but they were like little ticklers for the band, you know.
Right.
And once in a while, we'd play a gig where they needed them because it was that kind of a dance crowd. You're playing for a crowd that just is more a Basie crowd than yours, you know, or an Ellington crowd than yours, or a Kenton crowd. So you got to realize, well, I better play some of my hotter charts, as the leader would think, you know.
Yeah.
Well, some of those nights were wonderful for us. I mean, we played, but who knows about them? Only the people that were there and us, you know. And these things happen like that, you know. So we don't know.
Your point's well taken.
Yeah. So like Kluke's contribution, you know. If one of the writers was lucky enough to be at a place where Kluke was really hitting it on the right night, and he's going to write, and he writes about it, you know, well, then it's honest. He heard it, you know. But I don't think most of them ever heard it. I think you know. I think most of them wouldn't know it if they heard it.
I think we could both agree that one exception to that rule, and someone who's just written a book on the history of jazz drums, is Bert Corral. And Bert, being an ex-drummer himself, certainly has an insider's view on it.
Well, Bert loves and
that
understands
is nice.
the drums,
Yeah.
and could play the drums, and still can play the drums.
Oh, really?
I mean,
he
yeah.
still plays. I didn't know that.
But so his book on drumming, which will be coming out soon, I mean, is going to be very important as far as drumming is concerned, because he does know what he's talking about, and he heard or interviewed the drummer. I mean, he didn't make stories up.
Right.
And if he talked about things he heard from them, he heard it. And if he talks about things they said it, you know.
Yeah.
But he didn't create, like, it's not fiction. It's the truth.
And we have Mel Lewis here tonight at 7:47, and I'm going to bring it back now to Kenny Clarke and hear another recording. One you asked to hear, you had said we should play Things to Come. So I found a very rare air check of Things to Come with Dizzy's band with Monk on piano from the Spotlight Club on 56th Street. And you can hear Dizzy introduce the tune and dedicate it to Duke Ellington, which is really nice. So this is a rare version of Things to Come, Dizzy Gillespie's big band in 1946, and Kenny Clarke on the drums.
Next, we would like to play a number that's dedicated to the master, Duke Ellington. It's one of our very latest compositions. The title of this tune is Things to Come. Things to Come. There it is. There we go. Whee!
Couldn't hear the drums too well, but still.
No, only you could hear him a little bit when on the Behind the Vibes solo when they brought.
Of course, that was Milt Jackson on vibes, and Ray Abrams on tenor, Monk on piano, Dizzy on trumpet.
Dizzy sound. But if you listen close, actually he's playing pretty straight ahead. I mean, I didn't hear any bombs dropping anywhere really.
It's amazing.
And I think they would have come through. Some of the bombs would have. He wasn't doing it. I think just hanging on for dear life, playing straight ahead. But see, on the original recording, which I have, which was the first record I ever bought, that and Queer Street, those two records.
Right.
I think I mentioned that on the last one. I was talking about Queer Street.
Queer Street and Things to Come.
Yeah, those are my two first records I ever bought, so I listened to them. That's all I had to listen to over and over and over again. And I didn't hear anything really new. That's why I always felt that Max was the cat.
Yeah.
I really. Of course, we'll get around to that later.
Yeah.
But what Kluk gave, what he does do, like those fills, the little fills, like when they that was a whole new. That was a different way of playing fills. Those were very modern. They were not typical old-fashioned drum fills. They were very modern fills. Dynamic. You could hear the like the, but like Shadow actually on the other one. Yeah. And then of course the phrasing of those Kluk, the way he. That's why the band played those entrances and those that introduction, and then when they repeated it, it was so clean and so good was because of the way he made sure of that. I mean, he was a dominant force at that point. Although I think Dizzy was playing along with the band on those things. Because Dizzy once told me that he had he taught the guys how to play that stuff.
Well, that tempo is just ridiculous.
Oh, it's ridiculous tempo. Bum 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 bum. But Kluk was smooth. Yeah. I mean, that tempo was with a big band was fast. That was fast, and it didn't waver. And it had a great feeling all the way. So, but I still think that the kind of stuff that that you would have expected is not there, and it wasn't there on the original record either. He plays straight time, really.
Yeah.
So, but that's with the big band now. We're talking about the big band.
And right now we're going to go to a small group.
Yeah.
A group that was formed originally out of the Dizzy Gillespie band, because as John Lewis has said, the charts were so demanding for the brass players, as you could hear on that chart, that they need to rest their chops sometimes. So Dizzy would bring out the rhythm section, which was Kenny Clarke, John Lewis, Milt Jackson, and Ray Brown.
Ray Brown, right.
And after Ray Brown left and Percy Heath came in with Dizzy and with the Modern Jazz Quartet, it became the Modern Jazz Quartet. And right now I'd like to go to, I guess, what we call a more typical Kenny Clarke recording, and we can really appreciate what his signature on the drums was. This is the Modern Jazz Quartet in the early 50s, I think 1952 or 3. And this is called La Ronde. It's a feature for drums.
I know this piece,
Yeah, and Kenny's really beautifully recorded here, and we can really get into some of the more finer points on Kenny Clarke with this one.
See, now there, what that's what Kenny Clarke is famous for.
Yeah.
That marvelous cymbal beat, that real comfortable,
Yeah.
bouncy sound he got on a cymbal, and it was easy for a horn player to play over that. I mean, that's you couldn't want it any nicer than that, and because that's one of the things. First of all, it's the most important thing a drummer can have is his cymbal beat. That's where it's all at, and that was the beginning of. I mean, that was probably one of the nicest cymbal beats I ever heard. Especially in those days, and that's what Clarke had. Again, there's no bouncing around with the bass drum. You don't hear it, and of course the MJQ didn't go for too much of that anyway. It was that they went for a good hard swing, really. For what it was, piano vibes, all keyboards and bass and drums.
Yeah.
They sure could swing, and I think Clarke had so much to do with that.
How about the solo work on that?
The solo work it was all snare drum. I mean,
Yeah.
you didn't hear any tom toms or anything.
Yeah.
Clarke was a great old-fashioned modern player. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how else to put it.
What was it?
The snare drum was on the tight side too, and that was still calfskin time. But that snare drum, I think, if I recall, was one of those thin ones, one of those that sounded like about a 3.5-inch drum, like a piccolo drum we call it today.
You know how it is when you hear recordings at different times, they strike you different ways and you hear different things. That particular time when we were listening to it, I was really taken by Kenny Clarke's way of playing that used to sound to me as though he was rushing. Of course he wasn't.
No.
But it had that quality, you know what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
of course, of going ahead. It was that ride cymbal. He was always straining at the thing, but never rushing, but
No.
making it swing so hard,
Yeah, it was just the way.
What is it?
Well, he's playing
Hard to
1,
put-
2, 3, 4 for one thing. You're hearing 4 beats.
Not ding, 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 ding.
No.
Ding, ding,
You're
ding.
hearing like ding, 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 ding. But the middle beat is there. He's
Yeah.
playing it, but you just don't. There's such a low emphasis on it.
Yeah.
He really brings out the 4 beats to the bar
Yeah.
without playing 4 beats to the bar. I mean,
Yeah.
it's there, and the hi-hat took care of 2 and 4. You can hear
Yeah.
that coming down, and then bass drum. Most of his accents on bass drum are on 1 or 4.
Yeah.
And those are 1 and 4 are very swinging beats.
Yeah,
to
4.
Yeah, especially
Yeah.
4, and he's doing it. I mean, you didn't hear it too well there, but because of the treble in the recording, but this is what he did, and I still think most of his bombing, as we called in those days, they were on the beat bombs. It was that great feel he had. He had a tremendous feel.
Yeah.
He always swung.
Our mutual friend Dick Katz has talked about when he played in a band with Oscar Pettiford and Kenny Clarke, and he said it was a revelation, and it sounded to him as though when he first played with them that they were Russian. He didn't know what was going on, and then eventually I guess he figured out that all those years maybe he had been dragging or something. I don't know what it was, but this amazing thing.
Hey, listen, if they don't say anything to you, you're all right.
Yeah.
And if they call you back, you know you were all right.
Yeah, that's right, and he worked with them for quite a while.
Sure.
Let's hear some more Kenny Clarke. This is something that brings him into a situation comparable to yours, where he was the leader of an outstanding jazz orchestra, and really, I guess by far the greatest one in Europe for many years, along with Francie Bolan,
Right.
Kenny Clarke Big Band. We'll hear an original by Kenny Clarke called Sonar, and it's arranged by Francie Bolan, and the solos, I think it's Billy Mitchell and Ronnie Scott on tenors, and Idris Suleiman and a bunch of others. This is the early edition of the band. And you can hear Kenny Clarke on this with the big band, about 61 or so.
See now, there was a problem with the recording on that case. First, it was a big hall. They
Yep.
recorded it. And it was one of those European concert halls, not made for brass or drums.
Mm-hmm.
Sound great with strings, you know. And I don't know what hall it was, but I can tell that there was a scuffle between the band and Kenny. Kenny had to really stay on top of it there, which was now on that he really was on top because Jimmy Woody was dragging behind.
It was Jimmy Woody.
Sure,
yeah.
I know who was playing bass because I know who the rhythm section was. But that was created by the hall, and when you record with a big band, you have to really be able to hear each other. And there was a case where Clarke obviously was trying to keep that band from dying on him, from falling behind, and the bass was the reverb from the bass was making everything sound like it was, you know. So the rhythm section didn't sound together although they might have been. But it's the sound of the room that's causing that. I felt it was mostly the sound of the room because I heard that band in person. We traveled. We did a tour with them, with Thad Jones, Mel Lewis, and
Really?
Francie Boulon and Kenny Clarke. But the only thing I was unhappy about with that band at the time, as I thought was wrong, was that they had Clarke and Kenny Clare,
Right, two drummers.
two drummers, and Kenny Clare was a wonderful drummer, but we didn't need him.
Yeah.
But they had him playing all the fills because he had a lot of chops.
You mean they played at the same time?
Excuse me.
Gesundheit.
And Clarke was playing the time, you know. And of course there were hassles; you could hear it, you know. And Jimmy Woody was playing bass and so on, you know. But it just wasn't necessary.
Yeah.
It was one of those situations where when Clarke had to miss a week or two, and they used Kenny to substitute for him, and they liked Kenny, all the things he played because he was a, you know. So they thought, wouldn't it be nice? Let's have them both. You know, I don't think that was smart. I think it would have been better to just go with Clarke.
Yeah.
I mean, if you got to make a choice. First of all, it's Clarke's band, or it was really not even Clarke's band or Francie's band. It was Gigi Campi's band. Gigi Campi is a very nice man who is a restaurateur, if that's the word,
Yeah.
in Cologne, Germany.
Oh, it's still there?
A German Italian, yeah.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, he's still there. Has a restaurant and all that. And he loves jazz and he loved big bands, and he spent money to put that band together, which meant bringing guys from all the different countries. And every time they worked, they had to organize and rehearse and pay all those fares and get this one from there, from Amsterdam and from London and from in New York, you know.
Yeah.
And Johnny Griffin was in that band, and Derek Humble. And the band fell apart after a while when they lost their lead alto player. They couldn't find another lead alto player. That's exactly what happened, and they needed it.
Yeah.
Well, Benny Bailey was there and those guys, you know. But when you record over there, the engineers have some very strange ideas, and they spread everybody out, you know, and they really record badly, you know. I mean, they really don't get that nice, and to get them. But if an American comes over, like if I came over and I said, no, I want it this way, and they'll argue with it, and you say, all right, it's going to be this way or I'm going to leave. I was hired to come over here and play. Now you do it the way I want it, man, or I'm not going to play because I can't do it your way. You're wrong.
Yeah.
You don't know anything about this kind of music. And they go in the back, and then the producer will come out and he'll yell at the guy, and before you know it, you got everything the way you want it. So, but Clarke and these guys are all living over there. They had to live with these engineers, and I think they were stuck with a lot of bad situations.
Yeah.
You know, I could hear it. I could hear it like the band was raggedy. And it's not. It's great musicians in that band.
Yeah.
It was just raggedy because of the setup.
Yeah. Well, right now we'll hear Kenny Clarke in a small group for our last piece of music with Kenny Clarke, and this is with some old friends. This is with Dexter Gordon, Pierre Michelot, and Bud Powell. And something special happened when I think Bud Powell and Kenny Clarke and those guys played together. So now we'll hear Kenny Clarke in the quartet with Dexter Gordon. This is Broadway. All right, we heard Broadway, Dexter Gordon, Bud Powell, Pierre Michelot, and Kenny Clarke.
Now, that was, what's interesting about that is that, no, it was a good record. And, but, I always wondered, like, well, those particular musicians, including Dexter and but Bud and Clarke, were playing so great when they left America.
Yeah.
Go live over there. I hear things happening that sound to me like they were playing with Europeans too much, especially in those days.
Right.
I wouldn't say that today
Right.
so much because there's an awful lot of good players over there now.
What do you mean by that? That they were playing with Europeans too much?
They would have, if they would have stayed here and grown with the music that they started.
Right.
I think they would have. I'd like to have heard a record by them. Like, what year was this?
I think about 63.
I'd like to have heard them in '63 here, without having left America. Playing with the New York guys. That came up during the '50s and all that, man. Because there was some great players, and they would have been at the top of the heap.
Yeah.
And I'd like to find out. I'd like to have heard what they could have done if they had stayed here. See, there I hear the European influence. In other words, Clarke had to play with European bass players and piano players. He didn't play with Bud Powell every day. He hardly ever played with him. Bud Powell had a trio, worked with not with Clarke, but with the local guys in Paris. Clarke was traveling all over the place, and Clarke was a studio musician over there, making record dates, junk, a lot of crappy stuff, That's how he made his living. He made a very good one.
Yes, he
Jimmy
did.
Woody was doing the same thing, and he didn't live, and he worked out of Switzerland or somewhere, or Munich, So these guys didn't get together very often.
Yeah.
Only when somebody was smart enough to hire them. Dexter was living up in Copenhagen,
Right.
working at the Montmartre with Danish musicians all the time.
Yeah.
I know. So, now if the four of them could have played together all the time as a unit,
Right. Would have been
that
the
would have
greatest
been
thing.
different.
Yeah.
But I could hear it's a stiffness. There's sort of a stiffness that has always been bad, especially in rhythm sections in Europe. That still is there. They haven't really overcome that.
No.
That's why so many Americans, like Billy Hart and myself, and different people, bass players and all, are invited to come over and play
Oh yeah.
to Europe because Billy spends a lot of time over there. Kenny Washington just started doing a little traveling over there.
Yeah.
In fact, I sent him on a thing, but I mean,